the comparison to Trump, which undoubtedly did hurt Dutton, but it got to the point of ridiculousness where they ran the other way at every opportunity they could. Of course, when Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price said, "Make Australia great again," that was the end of the world, and I'll talk to her in a moment. And it got so bad that when Peter Dutton was asked in the ABC debate whether or not he trusted Donald Trump, his answer was that he'd never met the guy. Anthony Albanese said he's the President of the United States. Of course I trust him. It was the most simple question to answer, and yet Dutton couldn't tell the truth because he was worried about how people would perceive it. And I think, Kel, that explains a lot of what went on in this campaign.
I think that's right. Let's be fair. I think there were two abysmal campaigns. One was abysmal, one was utterly abysmal, and the abysmal one defeated the utterly abysmal one. There was nothing to admire about any of this campaign. But what happened in the Liberal Party, I have got a theory that somehow the Labor Party infiltrated moles into Liberal Party headquarters and then, hang on, no. And they stood up in front of a whiteboard with markers and they said, "We've done the research, we've run this through focus groups, you need to run an unfocused, undisciplined, obscure campaign." And everyone in the room said, yeah, sounds good, that's what we'll do. So what we had was a campaign that was totally unfocused. I mean, the attempt to soften Dutton was part of it, but he went along with that. I can't imagine a better political leader saying, "Oh yes, if that's what..." No, John Howard wouldn't have allowed for that. There was a lack of focus. Tony Abbott is a model on this because in 2013 what he actually did was to be very focused. Stop the boats, stop the tax.
Yeah.
Now, this could have been focused. There was the option was on the table for him to stand up and say, "This is the energy election. Living costs are too high, all about energy. Not just your power bills, but every supermarket, every factory, every warehouse. It's putting the price of everything up. So we're going to reduce it, gas in the short term, nuclear in the long term, and put up the argument." And have a focus. There was no focus. You cannot even compete without a focus. Now, Albanese had a focus. Albanese had the Viv Nicholson focus.
It was lying.
Viv Nicholson, in the 1960s, her husband won the pools. And they said, "What are you going to do with all this money?" And she said, "Spend, spend, spend." And she ruined their lives. And Spend, Spend, Spend became the title of a book about them and then a play about them. Well, he adopted the Viv Nicholson approach and said, "Spend, spend, spend." That's not a policy. A focused campaign could have defeated that. There was zero focus.
And I think, Lucy, there was an element of the Liberal Party and commentators, and probably at one point I was one of them, who started to believe our own bull, that we're looking at the polls and going, well, you know, Albanese is a terrible Prime Minister, surely this should be an easy job. And the polls reflected that 3 or 4 months ago. And then all of a sudden they started to turn. And I think there was an element of thinking, oh, well, you know, it'll be close enough anyway. If we get him into minority, we'll get him in 3 years' time anyway. It'll be all right. Sharri Markson, of course, said last night that the internal polling that she'd been told from within the Libs was that Labor would get potentially a slim majority or just under majority, and the Libs would get 65 seats. They might be lucky to get 40 now. Did they just think, well, it'll be okay, and they took their eye off the ball?
I just think that in this post-mortem analysis, and Kel is right to say it was an abysmal campaign versus a deeply abysmal campaign, I don't think in recorded memory I've seen the Liberals screw it up as badly as what they did. And, you know, make no mistake, we can criticise the lying of Albanese and the Labor campaign, etc., and how well they did to prosecute certain points. But the blame solely for me rests with the Liberals, right? And I've been so critical of them for months now because I think they've become this watered-down version of what we have come to expect from a Conservative arm of government. They haven't espoused the values and the traditions and the principles that we would traditionally come to expect from the right arm of government. So I started to get wind of Dutton showing some immense weakness back in January when I was filling in at 2GB, and I wanted him to come on the program program and talk about what's his view of biological reality when it comes to men versus women, men claiming to be women and trans-identified males competing in women's sport. Didn't want to have a bar of it. And I went, oh, this is a problem, right? And then Tony Abbott came on the program the next day and he said, look, I don't want to put words in Peter's mouth, but I expect him to have an eminently sensible position on this matter. Didn't want to lean into it. David Littleproud, the leader of the Nationals, had said to him, I think he should lean into this. Now, make no mistake, nobody expected the coalition government to win on this particular campaign point. It didn't have to be a big issue, but what does it mean when you acknowledge biological reality? You pay homage to conservative values, and it speaks to a far broader point about the principles that you should be defending and really going to market with. They failed to do that, and I'm so disappointed. I've been a Liberal voter for 20 years of my life and very transparent about that fact. I committed a protest vote at this election because I thought, you know what, you don't deserve our vote. We've seen so many people defect from the coalition and really go towards these independent parties because we're not seeing these conservative values, as I said, that we've come to expect. They blew it.
I think that's part of the problem, right? If you can't commit to what you actually believe in, people smell it. I mean, it's the same as in this business, you know. If I start saying things I don't believe in, the viewers know it. They know it and they turn off. And I think there was a degree of that here. I'm joined now by Shadow Minister for Indigenous Australians, Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price. Welcome, Senator. Where did it all go wrong?
Yeah, thank you, Caleb, and I'm loving the colour of your pocket square tonight. But look, I feel as though we could have absolutely sold our policies earlier than what we did do. And, you know, in order for the Australian people to understand what we were delivering, there's a lot that we have to convene at some point with my colleagues to to determine where we'd gone wrong. I mean, obviously, for the Nationals, we have been able to hold our seats, and there's still counting occurring. We know that Andrew Lethlean did an amazing job in Bendigo, and that he might just get over the line in Bendigo. So we're pleased about that, but. My concern is that there was, perhaps the campaign was driven more by fear as opposed to actually drawing that line in the sand. You know, the National Party came out early when it came to The Voice. We stood firm, we drew that line in the sand, and we were determined. And I would have liked to have seen, I guess more of that determination leading up to the election.